happy to have moved, and so I think that I might share some pictures he sent me of his hotel room, which was a really amazing place in Taos, or in Albuquerque, I guess it was. But in any case, I think he may be here tonight. I'm not sure. But anyway, good evening, everyone on the YouTube channel. It's 8 o'clock in the East. Do you know where your children are? We are this evening and for the next couple of weeks or a few weeks, Nick Lawrence, who is one of our regular participants, has agreed to lead a teaching on the combination and interaction of the major arcana of the tarot. So we're going to leave the minor arcana until probably September. And Nick is going to lead us on a series of evenings on this topic. And my other partners in crime here are Raquel Fonseca from Fonseca, right? From Brazil, and Gilda Cao from Vermont, I think she said. Ann Taylor's from Washington State. And Marilyn Katz is from Santa Clara, California. I don't know where Marion Smith is from. And Rhea is here too. So we have a nice panel tonight, and I think you'll enjoy it. So at this point, I'm going to turn the floor over to Nick, and it's your program to lead, Nick.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Let me get my screen shared and everything going, and we will begin. So I click on share screen, and I no longer see the same options that I used to. It says who can share, and I have an option to select only host or all panelists. And below that, it says who can start sharing when someone else is sharing. And
you don't have to pick those options. Just click on share screen, and it should bring up your screen, and then highlight the thing you want to share. There it is. We got it.
Great.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right. Let's see here. Okay, so over the coming months, we're going to be looking at the relationships between various cards in the Major Arcana. So I'm going to title this mini-series, Tarot Permutations, Analyzing Relationships Among Cards and General Methods of Comparison Between Cards. The general methods are just stuff that we're going to talk about tonight. So I'll go through these slides and talk about some of my approach in doling out these comparisons and relationships between cards. And if at any point anybody has any questions, observations, comments, please feel free to jump right in. Okay, so why compare the cards? When talking about any of the cards of tarot, consideration of a card as an isolated phenomenon is an incomplete but necessary step toward a fuller analysis of the cards. This mini-series is designed to look at the cards of the Major Arcana in relation to one another, and not as merely isolated events, in hopes of moving toward a fuller analysis and consideration of the cards as a gestalt and not as an individual phenomena removed from the context of the other cards. As with any field of comparison, some elements create harmony and some create disharmony. Asking this of the cards and the relationship to one another will be our task over the coming weeks. Okay, so the idea of harmony and disharmony. To further unpack the implicit and explicit questions of this mini-series, and by way of analogy, I asked the viewer to imagine all of the cards of the Major Arcana are together at a dinner party, and to imagine that any 2 or 3 cards strike up conversation with one another. Do they get on with one another, or do they hope to end the conversation as soon as they started it? Further, they have plenty to talk about and many things in common with one another. Or do they have nothing to talk about and come from such distant walks of life that they have no common ground to stand on and share a conversation in? Just as with any admixture of elements, such as the elements of a recipe to make a delicious pie, or the musical notes which comprise a particularly beautiful chord, some cards will create a wonderful comparison and provoke much thought about their underlying similarities. And some cards will be utterly at odds and disgusted with one another, just as the disgust of putting licorice with steak or an E flat with an A, and so on. Those are just my attempts at making somewhat of a joke, and also by way of comparison, you know, trying to create some dissonance. So some cards will be consonant and some will be dissonant. The goal with this exploration of the Major Arcana is to take a deeper look into the relationships between the cards and encourage a curiosity about the consonance or dissonance between the cards. All right. So my methods of comparison. As a note, these are merely suggestive methods of inquiry and comparison to forge relationships between the cards and begin an analysis of the cards. Anyone who wishes to do so may create their own methods of comparison because, again, comparison is the goal, and the method of doing so is secondary to the comparison itself. So in the following slides, I will explain, but just to give you a basic rundown of the methods of comparison that I plan to use over the coming weeks, we have the numerological method, the astrological method, the light and shadow method, the dialectical method, and the topographical method. So before we get into this, I would like to say that over the coming weeks, I plan to be sharing in the responsibilities of making presentations and so on with Raquel, Gilda, and also Jordan, who is not here presently, but will be in the coming weeks. So if any of you have any comments that you'd like to make at this point, or anybody in the panel, please do so.
What's going on?
And also, if not, I can just sally forth.
I just like some clarification in the dialectical method.
Marilyn speaking. And I was supposed to be assisting
I'm sorry, I'm hearing two people speak.
with that as well.
Who is speaking currently?
I'm actually need my assistance.
Okay, I think that could be Marilyn. If that's the case, Marilyn, we're having some difficulty hearing you. Sounds like your internet connection may be unstable or something.
Yeah, also Gilda was trying to speak at the same time.
Yeah.
Or Rhea, was that you? I see your...
No, it was
No.
not. It was
Okay,
not.
thank you. All right, so I'm going to mute Rhea.
Okay, well, hopefully Marilyn can achieve a stronger connection. And in the meantime, what were you saying, Gilda?
Well, I looked it up and I figured it out. The dialectical method, is that related to the narrative way of arriving at it when one does not use the more graphic methods of numerology, astrology, and the topographical method that shows?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what you mean, but I will say that in the slides that will follow this, I plan to really unpack each of these methods. So maybe let's reserve that until we get into that specific slide. I hope it will be clear enough. I think it's an idea that we've probably all been presented before, but maybe not under the heading the dialectical method. So,
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. All right. So moving first into the numerological method. Let me see here. Okay. So, as anyone who has used the tarot surely knows, the cards are numbered, and there are many reasons for this. It is through number symbolism, numerology, that relationships are forged, and I call this the numerological method of comparison. The most common method of doing this is based on the notion that the whole numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on, are the root, forms, or archetypes of all other numeral or decimal systems. For example, the numbers 0 through 9 form the basis of all other numbers, such as 15 being the combination of 1 and 5, and thus reducing it to 6, or 11, 1 plus 1, which is then reduced to 2. As such, the numerological method posits that a relationship must exist between the numbers 15, 1 plus 5, and 6, or 11, 1 plus 1, and 2. Since the tarot is based on the Roman numeral system and the major arcana range from 0 to 21, with a total of 22 cards, this method of comparison is used to establish relationships by the creators of the tarot and ultimately great results. Okay, so now I'll move into some examples of those. Okay, so here's an example of the numerological method as stated in the previous slide. The cards bear a striking resemblance to one another, and it is no mere chance that the comparative numerological method generates this dyadic relationship. This is one method of comparison we'll explore in the coming weeks. So the numbers of these cards are what I was talking about in the previous slide, where the double card is the 15th card, and 1 plus 5 equals 6. So, that may seem somewhat arbitrary, I understand, but at the same time, if you look at these cards, there is a striking resemblance between the actual matter of the cards. And I think it begs the question, is there really something to this numerological method of comparison?
Yeah, also 6 plus 15 is 21, which is the number of the total number of cards. And
yes, that's another very interesting way of arriving at a comparison between two cards.
Yeah,
I didn't include that, but I would really appreciate if you include that in the coming weeks. That's something
I'll do my best. And that is not something I prepared for tonight. Yeah. But
well, maybe if you are unable to, maybe I will do that. But that's
I have a book on it, but I hadn't done it. I thought you might do it, but anyway, the significance of it from a numerological point of view is that a lot of these, all these pairs, probably all the ones that Nick is going to talk about, add to 21, and based on their card numbers, and 21 then adds to 3, which is now chemical number in alchemy, and it relates to lots of things going back 2,000 years, which I won't go into tonight, but it relates to the theorem of Maria, who was a 3rd century alchemist who first posited the theorem of Maria. So Maria Prophetessa was her name, and she lived 1,800 years ago. But in any case, go ahead, Nick.
Okay, so that's the example of the numerological method of comparison, and now we will move on. And if at any point anything in my methods of comparison seems unclear, which I hope that it will not, but if it does, I would just add that it's probably less important that anyone understands the methods by which I'll draw these comparisons, and more that we attempt a comparison. So if anything seems esoteric, I apologize in advance and just caution that it is less important than the comparison itself. Okay, so the astrological method of comparison. The astrological method of comparison posits that the relationships between the cards can be forged and analyzed by the relationships inherent in the signs of the zodiac and their ruling planets. Based upon classical astrology, which makes use of 7 planets and the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 signs each have their respective ruling planets. Since 12 is indivisible by 7, this system holds that 2 signs of the zodiac are ruled by 1 planet each, and the remaining 10 signs are ruled by the 5 remaining planets, with 1 planet corresponding to 2 signs. For example, the planet Mars rules the signs of Aries and Scorpio, respectively. And also, just for those who are really into astrology, you know that this is something that's changed in recent years with the inclusion of Pluto in the planets. But I'm making use of classical astrology or Hellenistic astrology for this, so that will not apply. Okay, so we now have a dyadic or triadic structure of comparison for the cards. Mars corresponds to the Tower card, Aries corresponds to the Emperor card, and Scorpio to the Death card. Mars then is the force behind the cards, and the cards of the Emperor and Death are the filters through which the force of Mars is conveyed. Fundamentally, these 2 cards are different modes of expression for the same force that is Mars, and this can be seen in the similarities between the cards. So really what I'm driving at here is we have one force that is expressed in 2 different cards, fundamentally the same force, but just expressed through a different lens. Okay, so comparing these cards, both make overt use of red, the color associated with Mars. Both feature a stream running behind them, which is not something that many cards share. And both clearly have a capacity for destruction, even if it is a destructive energy, which serves an altogether different means. And this is the same destructive energy pictured in the Tower card. Remember that these cards picture different expressions of the same underlying force. Could I please ask everyone to mute? I'm getting some feedback of my own voice through someone's microphone. Okay, so remember that these cards picture different expressions of the same underlying force or energy. We will explore this method of comparison in the coming weeks. So is that landing for everyone? Does that make enough sense?
Yes.
Can I ask you something?
Please.
The Tower equals to Mars.
Mm-hmm. Right.
How is that arrived at?
So if you take all of the cards, this may be a little more complicated than we have time to fully go into, but since they're the seven classical planets, the 12 signs of the zodiac, since there are 22 cards, there are also 3 elements involved in this system. So different cards associated with the 7 planets, different cards are also associated with the 12 signs of the zodiac. And then that leaves you with 3 remaining cards, which are then associated with fire, air, and water. Okay. So Mars is associated with the Tower, the Empress is associated with Venus, and so on.
So it's associated with the Tower because it's a fire sign?
Well, I think it's probably associated with the Tower not having to do with anything with a fire sign, but just because the Tower pictures what is surely a destructive situation. And I think Mars, classically understood, has to do with intense destructive energy.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question also, which is that Mars rules 2 signs, right? Is a planet that rules. And then isn't Mercury the other planet that rules 2 signs? Or
yeah, so
Venus also.
What is that?
Right, yes. Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus all rule 2 signs apiece. And then that leaves both the sign of Leo and Cancer. Leo is ruled by the sun and Cancer is ruled by the moon. So that's how the signs with the planets, right, and the planets are distributed amongst the signs. It's kind of weird, but yeah, I described it here in this paragraph where I was saying that 12 is indivisible by 7, 5 of the signs, 5 of the planets rule 10 signs,
Right.
and 1 planet corresponds to the 2 remaining signs.
Right. So 5 times 2. So 5. Yeah. 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Advanced math.
It's a little bit, it's a lot of information to hold in your head, but at the same time, like I said, I don't think it's absolutely necessary that everybody understand the method behind the comparison, but just that we can look at those 2 cards or those 3 cards together and understand that there's something behind them which ties them together.
We find it very interesting because we understand astrology very well, and we did the cards without learning this methodology for over 30 years. So now we're getting a new leaf.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think we should mention that you're using the Bota deck for these images, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I am, but the associations are the same across most decks. So whether it be the Thoth deck, the Rider-Waite deck, the Bota deck, Golden Dawn deck, all of the system which ascribes certain planets and what have you to certain cards remains the same.
Is this tied to the Kabbalah?
Yes, it is. Yeah. That's how these systems are put together. So yes, the tower is related to Mars, and also Mars is the pathway that connects these 2 spheres here. It's associated with the Hebrew letter Pei. So it's a very complicated web of all these different associations that probably isn't wise for me to go into now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I will go forward. Okay, so I'm calling this the light and shadow method. The light and shadow method is a largely subjective method of comparison, in that what I see as negative and positive may not be shared by all. This again is a purely suggestive method of inquiry and comparison, and one that is subject to the individual's interpretation. The idea is to look for 2 cards which express the same idea in a noble and ignoble form, or light and shadow. For example, I will take the idea of mind, or the intellect, typically associated with Mercury, and look at 2 cards which convey the mind used for noble and ignoble means. Okay, so the comparison here is between the Devil card and the Magician card. And I was interested to see Skip, since she said probably most of these cards would stack up to 21, and I don't think that's going to be the case. You're muted currently.
Probably not, based on what you've said here, but what I was referring to, I think it's something that Jodorowsky observed in one of his books, and so I will. I'm gonna step away for a minute, go get my book out of the living room, and see if I can find what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that when we were going through the Major Arcana the first time, and I'm sure that yields some very, very interesting comparisons.
Yeah, so I'll come back in a moment.
Cool. Okay, so for now, let's look at the Magician and the Devil as through the lens of light and shadow. So in the case of the Magician, the mind is used to create illusion and inspire awe in those who watch his tricks. However, magicians know that it is not through spiritual power which they do their magic, but through diligent and focused training of the mind that they are able to hold an audience spellbound. Harry Houdini is a great example, and his oft-quoted saying comes to mind. My mind is the key that sets me free. And you know, Harry Houdini is a pretty interesting character, and I think that tons of people, I think it's even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, thought that Harry Houdini had all of these spiritual powers, to which he replied, "My mind is the key that sets me free." Okay, so on the other hand, and in the case of the devil, here, the mind is the key which imprisons those in the card and renders them slaves only to what their small minds can verify as real. Nihilism, scientism, and destitution abound when the clever mind is the only means through which the mysteries of the world are approached. All is nothing but mere atoms slamming against one another with no purpose or meaning, because they are smarter than to fall victim to superstition. It is no coincidence that the symbol of Mercury is placed over the knave of the devil, and the magician is the traditional card associated with Mercury. So again, the idea here is a noble and an ignoble expression of Mercury, or of the mind. Okay. Raquel, I wonder if you could make any comments, if you would like to, on this. I know that you're probably more conversant, and Gilda as well, about astrology than I am. So I wonder if you think this is something that, based on your understanding, makes sense for you.
Yeah, it does. But I believe that the magician already has an ignoble expression of the mind, without pending exactly to the devil card. But I think it's interesting to see both of these cards together, because then, as seeing as separate entities, we can see how the ignoble expression can be, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not actually perceived inside the magician card, and with the devil, it's easier to watch that part. But
yeah, I think I also added that note about it being mostly subjective for those reasons, because I think depending on your understanding and also your understanding of astrology and stuff like that, you can probably arrive at the same conclusion by just analyzing the magician card, or people don't have a purely negative association to the devil card. But I thought it was
I'll show that, let's say if I'm just playing with numbers here and I look, there's number 1 and then there's 1 and 5. Mm-hmm. Aries is the first sign. It is raw energy put out, ready to become something. It is a force that it takes for form to create. And 5 on its own transcends the structure form itself, because 4 is that perfect cube, perfect structure, and it throws things out of structure in order to create something else. And so when you add both numbers, then it becomes not so much having to do with the intellect, but having to do with the heart. 5 and 1, 6 is also the number of the heart, of a tantric communion, maybe with Mercury and the heart. The intellect and the heart becomes harmonious and creates love, the card of love, number 6. So here you have all 3 forms that could possibly take. The first one is trying raw energy, Aries, trying to win structure, and 15, the structure is bound. Mm-hmm. It's not free to create, to co-create. And if you take the numbers apart, you will also end up with what I just explained, bringing in the number 6 card. So I've never used this method before, but and I know numerology and I know astrology and all of it, but separate. I never tied it to the tarot because I read it intuitively and eventually it came alive for me. But by playing with it, it is obvious that there it is.
Yeah, and I hope you will talk about that in the coming weeks, because these are all, for the most part, things that is specifically these later methods of comparison are things that I've just come up with, methods of just playing with the cards and thinking about the relationships between the cards. So it's absolutely subjective about my own thoughts on the tarot and how they relate to my life and stuff. So I'm very interested to hear in the coming weeks over different people's methods of comparison and stuff like that. Okay, well, I will move on. Okay, so now for the dialectical method. Dialectics, or the dialectical method, is a philosophical approach used for the purposes of examining a truth or arriving at a truth. For our uses, the Hegelian dialectic method is particularly useful. This method follows the formula of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Thesis is the original idea, so water is liquid. Antithesis is then an opposing idea, so water can be solid in the form of ice or gaseous if heated to a boiling temperature. And synthesis then comes as the third stage in which the two contradicting ideas are joined to create a more comprehensive version of a truth and resolve their apparent contradictions. With so many of the players on the stage of tarot being in contradistinction to one another, a move for synthesizing the contrary players is needed, and this is where the dialectic method comes in handy. Okay. So again, I'm kind of drawing on what I've already laid out with the astrological method here, because the Justice card is associated with Libra, and the Hierophant card is associated with Taurus, which, if you know astrology, you know that both of those signs are ruled by Venus, and the Empress card is associated with Venus. So now, with this dialectic formula in mind, the question is, how do the seemingly antithetical truisms of the Hierophant and Justice cards find resolve in the Empress? How does one resolve the love of God and the love of justice in the goddess of beauty? What is more beautiful, the Empress, than a godly Hierophant and just Justice card society? Thus, they are synthesized. So I've said at several points, it will mostly be a comparison in a dyad, in a one-to-one relationship, but I think it would be interesting for several of us to also explore a triadic structure of comparison where we're looking at two contradictory cards and then asking the question, which card could potentially bring these two contradictions together? So that's the dialectic method. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I think it's based on alchemy. It is the foundations of alchemy and the foundations of science. So when I discovered that the Kabbalah was underneath all of this, I said, oh my God, it's still here. Because, and the Empress would be, also represents the heart, which brings together justice and the Hierophant. So yeah. Those are the three centers. And 3 is an activating number, whereas 2 is the realizing number. So action is here mobilized as an agency.
Yeah, I mean, as true as that may be, I think it's also an idea that goes much, much further back into history than alchemy does. I mean, even Socrates and Plato and all the earliest philosophers had their own versions of the dialectic. So it's a very old idea, but this is the Hegelian dialectic method, and it's, I think,
yes, it's a very old. It's everywhere. It's the foundation of so much. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is, I think this might be kind of funny, definitely a bit playful, but I called this the topographical method. This is a somewhat playful method of comparison, but one that I find still very helpful and which generates very interesting comparisons. By the topographical method, I coin a method which, based on the scenery, terrain, and location of the characters in the cards, posits a relationship to other characters in the same or similar locations. Imagine all the tarot cards are on a map together. Some are high on the mountains, alone and solitary. Some are by moving water engaged in various activities. Others still are inside of a great temple of stone, and so on. As with most things tarot, this is not by chance, and one should be curious about the reasons for this, as well as the relationships that are born out of these careful placements. So these are the two cards in which, both figures are alone on mountains. And, that seems like that's probably something that's worth exploring. So what does it mean that both the Hermit and the Fool are solitary figures on snow-capped mountains? I think they're the only cards that have anything to do with mountains, apart from the Moon card. It has mountains in the distance. Well, actually, that's not true. Several cards come to mind now. What does it mean that both the Hierophant and the High Priestess are seated in a great temple between two great pillars? I don't know exactly what to make of this, but I hope to explore this in the coming weeks.
Well, that would be duality and what it takes to conquer duality and move beyond it or synthesize it into something else.
Well, yeah, can you say more about that?
Well, the duality of life in spiritual circles, which are prominent nowadays, to be non-dual awareness is when the mind recedes and the psychic body comes to the foreground and it has an intelligence of its own and no longer needs to debate between black and white, bad or good, ugly or pretty. These things, it doesn't create these, it doesn't use that in order to arrive at a synthesis, for example. Mm-hmm. It arrives at it from another dimension and goes beyond duality. Mm-hmm. Whereas these two cards are seeking to do that, but they're still utilizing duality as their boundaries of operation. They go from this to that, this to that. So one or two, and 5 would be trying to go beyond the 4, which is double 2, which is the completion of a structure. A cube is these perfect structures. But that one will be in sacred geometry would be the circle, the square inside the circle. The square inside the circle would be number 5, where it transcends the square, and it is a circle that has something awesome, some structure to it inside. So that would be number 5.
Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down, but I guess my question is how do we relate that to the cards? Are you imagining this duality being between these two cards, between the poles?
Well, yes, we're bringing it on because there is a transcendent function besides the matrix already laid down and how to read them with a matrix. Here, the priestess is coming from open, black and white, trying through the word because she's got a tarot thing. Makes sense. And over here, the Hierophant has already rules, spiritual rules that he's already done apparently what the High Priestess is busy trying to bring down from nothing to create a third thing. He's already done all of that. That's why he has a triple crown on his head. 1, 2, 3. He's already done those 3 things. And now he can tell others what it is all about because it's been there. But he still uses duality because he's got, the people are still in duality that he's speaking with because that's the front of the card facing him. That's what faces him. But he's seated above them and he carries a stick with a 3 and he wears a triple crown. That's 6 also, so that's the heart. His rulership embodies a transcendence. And he's headed towards the heart, which is number 6 in my estimation, but the heart center would be number 6. I realize that you mentioned about the mind being the key factor, but mind without heart and without the sacrum.
I just want to be clear. I was not saying necessarily that the mind is the key factor, just in relationship between those 2 cards, and as it has to do with Mercury, that was the topic of discussion. But
Right. What's been underneath? That's I understand. That's the matrix in which functions. But also, the tarot was laid down a very long time ago, and now we're reaching a time where a lot of human beings are transcending duality. So I just want to throw that out there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned the stuff about rules and law and everything, because she holds a scroll that says Torah, and Torah means law, which is that's pretty interesting. I hadn't thought about that myself, but I think that
I didn't know it meant laws, but I can read it. It's just so many years. Yeah, but I didn't know. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So it is incredible how the numerology just adds up. Numbers have an intelligence of their own, just like planets. They're like archetypes, and they're hardly ever referred to as archetypes, but they certainly are, and they play immensely with the tarot. It's really amazing because also the shape of the number, the actual mark, that is also has something to do with how they play.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on who you ask about numbers and how they're something like archetypes or like Plato's forms or something like that. I mean, Plato was certainly influenced by the Pythagorean school of mysticism, and their entire life revolved around numbers. So they certainly thought that to be true. All right. Well, if no one has any more comments, I will continue. Okay. What does it mean that both the figures in the Temperance card and the Star card are drawing water from a pool and may even be opposite one another at the same pool? Again, it's fun for me to imagine, and I think it might actually be, there may be something to it, but I could be wrong. But alas, it's fun to imagine a huge map where all of these tarot cards are just strewn out on the map, but they're all in one locale, more or less. And I think that it's probably worth paying some attention to the fact that several of the characters are right by the water or have a stream flowing through the card, or are on mountains or in a walled garden or something like that. All right. So in conclusion, over the coming weeks, Jordan Hoggard, Gilda Cao, Raquel Fonseca, and myself will be exploring these methods of comparison, as well as their own individual and unique methods of comparing the cards with one another. Our hope, again, is to encourage the viewer to take a deeper dive into the cards of the Major Arcana and reap the fruits of comparison and symbolic thinking. Stay tuned over the coming weeks for individual presentations of our thinking and method at the normal time on Monday nights, and we thank you. So that's everything that I have prepared for tonight, and this was just to serve as kind of an introduction to what we're going to do over the coming weeks. So I don't know if there's anything else that I can personally say about it before we dive into it, but now the floor is open for any conversation, thoughts, questions.
Sure. Can we review the panel with the Star and Temperance?
Sure. Yeah, let me just get it back up now.
That's rather interesting. That right. You said there is a certain be opposite one another at the same pool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what did you mean by that?
Well, I just kind of have a fantasy that they may be, at the same pool, and they're just on different sides of the pool from one another. Okay. Maybe it's a small pond and they're just right across from one another.
Okay. Well, Seven and one, like in numerology, seven is a number of perfection, as you mentioned, the 7 planets. There's seven, the chakras are seven. It's a number of a certain completion. And when you add one more to it, then the structure doubles. 4 and 4 doubles the structure, which is a number of perfect structure, doubles, and therefore it becomes power. So number 8, not only is it the number 8 has that infinity symbol laced, which is a number, is also a number of power, but power working individually with completion. So the 7 is completed, but it's separate. Then it has the individual 1. And I know that 1 and the magician here is referred to Mercury, but we wonder, that's why we asked about the tower being Mars, because Mars is the first sign, number 1. So, and Aries is ruled.
Right.
So that also, that's kind of, it's not quite, that's why it wasn't so clear how it became the tower. But so here, 1, when you add raw to a perfect structure, then you have power, because you have the raw of organic and structure at its highest point of homeostasis. So that is that perfect star up there with 8 points. And then when I look at temperance, it is 1 below, because it's the 1 structure, 4 and 1. Adding 1 to the 4 in order to mobilize it further. So maybe when you mentioned that they were perhaps in the same pool, they probably might be, and they're trying to elevate the structure in order to make it reach heaven, make it reach a height like the angel is, but he's dealing with lower the lion, and he's with lower the animal instincts, which seem to be below, whereas over here those animals are no longer there. There's a bird over there, but she doesn't have to appease that perhaps the instinctual, which is yet not structured.
Yeah. To
elevate the spirit as well as the mind and the heart. Oh, we have thunderstorms here. So so I found that curious.
Yeah.
And even more so because I was born on the 17th and my life path is 14. So I'm saying, whoa, okay. So now that is examined, one is still, temperance is still dealing with the lower earth impulses, where star has already transcended them and created a double structure, the material and perhaps spiritual or the mind, and combined them in order to reach the heavens. So you've got the sky clear with lights. Whereas here the rainbow is promising, but he's still dealing with the animal instincts below.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned structure, because the thing that I would add to that it probably has something to do with tempering the astrological structure of the personality, in that the angel is pouring water on the fire sign of Leo and pouring fire onto the eagle, which is associated with Scorpio. And in the other card, the animals don't seem to play a very large role. It's later in the series, so maybe I should have put 14 on the left and 17 on the right. But here it certainly seems like, to borrow from what Jordan is likes to say, it seems like a higher octave of a similar experience or expression of an energy.
Yes, and the lion and he said Leo and
Scorpio,
and the eagle is related to Scorpio, because sometimes I also think of Aquarius as related to the eagle, but because it's an air sign. But both are fixed signs, and those are the fixed signs of fire and the fixed sign of water, and that's what the alchemists, you in one of the earlier presentations you made, that's what they used in order to create the third thing.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that also in the Wheel of Fortune. Those are two of the four animals, or two of the three animals, and then the human around the wheel.
Yeah, and you can see it at card 21 too, the world.
Yeah, right.
We always wonder why they had those fixed signs there versus other signs.
Yeah, and it's also, it's interesting that you mentioned, I think you said something about Aquarius. Aquarius is associated with the star, and Temperance is associated with Sagittarius.
Yes.
So there may be something to that as well.
Yeah.
I have a question actually about the Temperance card that it's related to the animals, precisely because in the Wheel of Fortune, there's both of these animals shows in that card as well. Leo sign and Scorpio sign. And to me, the Temperance angel, both he's pouring water in the Leo sign, but he's also pouring fire in the eagle for me. Like he's basically like water. But it's interesting because Scorpio is a water sign, but ruled by Mars, which would be a fire-related planet, for instance. But I don't remember how the Wheel of Fortune card is portrayed in this tarot deck. This is why I don't really remember.
Exact same in the Rider-Waite deck. I don't know if you can recall that or not, but it's
similar.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got the wheel in the center with the various symbols. In the center of the wheel, four fixed signs of the zodiac around it. Yeah.
That's a great observation, Raquel, because he's pouring water on the fire sign of Leo, and he's putting fire on the water sign of Scorpio. Yeah. So he's using the opposition, which Nick had in his earlier notes, the opposition in order to come together and create the third element in the alchemical process.
Dialectic method to this card alone. Yeah. Skip, were you able to find that?
Yes, I was. And what I'm going to do, let me, if you would discontinue your share just for a minute. What I've done is I've gone to the Hoggard and I've copied out one chapter for you. Let's see how this works. Are you seeing this?
Yeah.
Okay, so the pairs that add up to 21, 11 paths of realization. And so I'm just going to scroll through it slowly so that people who are watching the YouTube channel will be able to later go back and stop the video and try to read these things. Now, for everyone that's here physically in the panel tonight, I'm going to email a copy of this to you. Okay, so I'm just scrolling through and connecting up the cards that add up to 21. And I just want to do it slowly so people don't get too much whiplash. Okay, now this is an extremely comprehensive book that I'm looking at here, which I'm going to show you in a minute. But anyway, it's 11 paths of realization. So when we're talking about realization, we're talking about the theorem of Maria, which is probably the basic alchemical theorem, which is 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes 4, which becomes 1 again. And so this is the fundamental idea of all evolution and development. And so 2 plus 1 equals 3, which, so if you think about it this way, that you as an individual are 1, and you meet a partner who makes you a pair, 2. And then that's thesis, antithesis. And then that thesis, antithesis merges, okay, it alchemically combines to a third thing, which is the 3. And that's a synthesis. And then once you have a synthesis, then you're back to 1 again. And it repeats over and over again in everything in nature. So very simply, that's what that's a reference to. And that's why it's 21. And it's why my license plate adds up to 21, which is 7. My license plate number is 25743. And that's 3 sets of numbers that add up to 7, and then 3 7s add up to 21. And then the 0 card, the fool, is me driving the car. So if you will.
We will always also share that Marie from France, in a lot of her fairy tales, she's a Jungian, right? For those who might not know. Very distinguished, and has written many books on her interpretation of the fairy tales, which is all over the world. The 3, the 4 and the 3, and the 4 and 3 was constantly at play. 3, the king with 2 sons, 3 males, and then the queen, 1, needed to go away. And always when there was 3 of one and 3 females and 1 male, then something would happen. Yeah. So they needed some tragedy or something needed to occur in order for it to come back into balance and start all over again. Right. So that same alchemical process is throughout. And I joined the literary group, and you can find this across just about any short story, probably a novel too, that it's at play. It's just an underlying structure that is inherent in everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the book, which is The Way of Tarot, the Spiritual Teacher and the Cards is the name of the book.
Who wrote it?
Alejandro Jodorowsky.
Okay.
With Marianne Costa. We can't forget Marianne because she probably actually wrote it, for all I know. The women always do all the work and get second billing, so we're changing that. That's what our session with Ann Taylor is going to be about on Saturday. But for now, so that's the book. And as I say, I will send everybody that's on the panel right now this particular paragraph or chapter. And then, let's see, I need to.
It's actually the basis of algebra, of all the science, everything, where an X is placed, and then that's how they figure out the possibilities.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's a terrific book. It's quite thick, and it's very complex. So that's a good book to get once you're basically grounded in the tarot.
So it's alchemical, and or does it use also astrology?
I beg your pardon?
Is it mostly based on alchemy, or is it based on astrology?
Oh, it's basically it's mainly on numerology, I think.
Yeah. Okay. It's not based on astrology.
Yeah, it's mainly numerology, and I gotta unpin myself there. Okay, so Nick, you're good to go to share your screen again.
That was all that I had prepared. If there are any comments or questions in the YouTube chat, I'd be happy to throw those around in the group or just open up into general discussion. But that's everything that I have for this week.
Okay.
We wanted to ask you which deck is that you are using for your presentation?
It's called the Bota deck.
Oh, because I have the Bota deck. My Bota deck is black and white.
Say it again.
My Bota deck is black and white.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, the idea is that you're supposed to color it yourself.
Okay.
Symbolism is very important in the cards.
So you colored that deck?
I have colored my own deck, but those are just images that I sourced from Google. But yeah, you know, to go back to your question about the Tower card, I mean, that's one of the reasons that it's so important to color those cards, is because red plays such an important role in all of the cards that have to do with Mars. And okay. The same is true for several other cards that in that system are related to certain colors. So that system emphasizes astrology, numerology, the Kabbalah, the Hebrew alphabet, all of these different methods of interpretation and analysis into one system, which is invaluable in my opinion.
I agree. It also includes art, because when you begin to throw in colors have temperatures, colors have qualities, textures. So then it makes everything really rich. That's why, in my estimation, why tarot, and I put it away for a long time, but the more I look at it, it's like language. It can connect anything. It is a recipient that it is so rich, but it has numbers and letters and language and pictures, and the space in between allows for something new to come in, because it's together when the person involved using it brings forth the missing piece. On their own,
not to mention it's just fun to color your own cards.
Yeah. Well, for the class tomorrow, we made a chariot for the art class.
Okay, there's a question here from one of our panelists, which is, how much is the Bota deck? And the answer to that is that when I bought it from Amazon, it was $8 within the last year, but Amazon adjusts prices based on demand. So Nick said he thought it was about 20. Anyway,
it's $23. It is, but that comes with literature as well, describing the cards, the meaning of the cards, the associations of the cards, and also the color scheme for the cards. So it's not just $23 for a tarot deck that's black and white. It comes with pretty much all the information that you need to get going. I will post a link to that in the YouTube chat.
Bota.
Who's curious.
Yeah, yes. Nick, Ann Taylor has asked a question here on the YouTube chat, which is, do you know what the name of the magician is in the Crowley deck? I guess that's the top deck.
In the top deck, it's the Magus, I believe.
The Magus, yeah. Okay, that's right.
And Crowley, took some liberties with the cards and switched certain things around.
He certainly did.
Small thing. I mean, the symbolism is, very unique, but still largely expresses the same meaning across all of the cards.
Right.
But he did change a few things, and I don't know if I can call up from memory exactly what it is, but he moved some of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet around, changed some of the names of the cards and stuff like that. And, the reasons that he did that are somewhat controversial. I guess it depends on how interested you are in Crowley and how far you want to go into that. But, he essentially had what he called his own daimon or spiritual being attached to him that told him that he should change all of that stuff. And he followed suit, quite literally.
I believe that that's one of the things that tarot offers altogether, that is also a personal individuation journey. And it allows for something new to arise, even though there is a basic structure. It's my experience. I never knew about the basic structure that you're talking about. And I knew numerology, I knew astrology, and I knew tarot, but I never connected it with the Kabbalah, but it all came to be. It was just, it all works together, which is, that was the very interesting thing. Yes, exactly. And when I find, and what one gets out of it, like I created a ballet, I haven't revealed all the things that arose out of that creation, which are involved in that creation, but they're completely unique. They just use, in revelatory, they simply use the method, the structure of dance and choreography, lighting and number, everything. It uses everything just to tell it. But the revelation was...
I was really trying to inadvertently allude to your ballet when I was saying the many players on the stage of the tarot cards are in contradistinction to one another, because I just also kind of had this fantasy of, say, all of these guys are on a stage in a theater, you know, some cards or some characters will probably get along with one another and dance and have a good time, and others will be like, I don't like you that much. So I thought...
I call it the life game, because it's a life game. That's why it's still pertinent, and it will continue to play, because it's the game of life, and on many, many levels.
Yeah. So let's see if we have any comments or questions in the YouTube chat here.
Now, this is my magician of the bow tie. Is that the one you showed?
Yes. Actually, no, it's not the one that I showed in this presentation.
That's what I thought.
I couldn't find that image online on Google colored in. It was only in black and white. And you know, for some of the differences are pretty slight between the Rider-Waite and the Bota deck. It's really, I find it to be an interesting story. I don't know if it will be for anybody else, or it will just be a snooze fest. But you know, the people who created the Rider-Waite deck, Arthur Edward Waite and Pamela Coleman Smith, and several of their cohorts were involved in the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah. And
the guy who started Builders of the Addydom was also involved with a branch of the Golden Dawn, which was based in the U.S. And they parted ways later. So he then traveled to the West Coast and started his own order, which he called Builders of the Addydom. And he, for the most part, used the exact same tarot that they were using, because they're the originators of the tarot, as we know it, as the Rider-Waite deck. But he made just a few changes. So largely the decks are the same. The Magician card is pretty much the exact same in both decks. But there are some cards, for instance, the Death card, which are very different, or the Sun card is very different. I mean, they still express a very similar meaning, but the cards themselves are quite different. And I actually prefer the Bota deck just because they're stylistically more pleasing and a little more artfully constructed, in my opinion.
There's also a deck called Sola Busca, and I believe it's a much earlier deck, and it's Italian. And in the story goes, in my little research, that Pamela and Arthur Waite must have seen that deck. It was probably somebody's personal property. Because a lot of the images begin to present themselves there as the way the tarot looks nowadays.
Well, yeah, it's a much older tradition. I know that you've talked about the Mantegna Tarocchi, Eliphas Levi, who was an early Kabbalist and general thinker, and had his own version of the tarot, which greatly influenced the guys in the Golden Dawn. And there are several other iterations, but the interesting thing, which Skip has also pointed out several times, is that they more or less have not really changed that much over the course of some 600 years. So there are similarities, and you can trace that through all of the decks. But
yes, in the really early from 1400s Italian deck, instead of incorporating the numerology of the planets within these 21 cards, they are separate cards. They have separate cards for all the planets and separate card for all the astrological signs. So the deck is about 90 some cards or something. So eventually, some consolidation occurred with numerology being one of the foundations underneath, which is part of science and mathematics, which actually it's a precursor of our modern
I think
scientific world.
The most interesting thing to me about 78 too, the 78 cards, is that if you take 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 all the way up to 12, what do you get? 78.
It's cool. It's totally cool.
It's very cool. And I think for a lot of people, probably, well, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I think that the concern with stuff like this is that it's either arbitrary or somewhat of a rabbit hole, and you can just, go into these endless permutations of numbers and their relationships and stuff. And I would tend to agree generally, but the fact that when you do that, it actually generates meaningful comparisons and relationships between cards leads me to believe that there's really something to it.
Yes. But perhaps the transcendence of why it hasn't changed in so many years is that it also carries that even if a person does not know that matrix, intuitively they will arrive at the divination process. So in that way, they transcend the need of language, because the subjective connection to life itself as a narrative allows them to create a story that they can put forth. And that's how I learned it. Yeah. I never read the book. I would read things occasionally, the little black book or this or that, or the little white book, sorry. And so many years of doing it, it became a point where it was obvious that my being understood the language of the expression. Now, by having what you're, all these under layers underneath, this refining language is like when one writes poetry and one enhances the possibilities of creation. So we think it's very cool. And when Skip was presenting that a fifth suit might be suitable, we explored that and thought about it. And we said, oh, this is what it is. You add 3 to the top number, 3 in all the cards. And because 3 is 2 eyes and the third eye, when you add the third eye, that, immediately there's a human being will live in another dimension when that eye opens. And so when I started adding it on top, it was amazing. By the time you get to the 9 or the 10, the actual 108, which you can find across spiritual traditions, it just showed up. It's very peculiar, I have to say. The permutations are endless.
Yeah, Wingman on YouTube says it's like Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole.
Right. It very much can be, but it's actually, I would also just add to that there's a long and rich tradition within the Kabbalah called Gematria, which is also a system of looking at words, their numerical value, and the numerical value of, you can do this with the Bible. It's actually really interesting and really, really quite profound, I think. But you can take things in their original Hebrew wording and establish their numerical value, and then also establish other things with the same numerical value, and then posit there must be a relationship between these two things.
Yes.
Right. And one example of that, which I've explored myself, and I just stumbled on this kind of based on intuition, and it really, really actually blew my mind. I didn't know, this is probably the first time I told anybody about it, and I didn't really know how to even word it to someone, but there's a story, I can't remember in what book of the Bible it is, but it's the story which some of the movie 300 is based on. And in that, which it's also an older story as well, which has a Greek cognate version. But also in that story, the Spirit of God, which in the Bible is called the Ruach Elohim, which enumerated is 300, tells this warrior that he has to take 300 warriors to battle with him in order to defend himself and his people. And that to me, I mean, I don't know if that lands for anybody else, but I just thought the fact that 300 plays such a large role in the story itself, and also in the enumeration of the Spirit of God that moves over this man and gives him his direction. That seemed very meaningful to me, but that's just one example of the larger tradition in which this practice is nested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so just for the record, I have now emailed to everyone that's here, and also to Anne and to Manuela, the chapter that I got together for you.
Thank you.
And so you'll be able to examine that in detail. Let's see. Okay, so I'll give you this question. I already answered it on YouTube, but Nick, you can answer it too. Okay. Phil says, my knowledge of the tarot is poor, and I apologize if this is off topic, so please feel free to not to answer it. Is there a card that correlates with the Germanic goddess Hel, which is Mother Heli in the German panoply of gods, I guess?
Yeah, I don't know that much about Germanic gods and goddesses, but I would, which I see the comment here, which say yes, the Empress card, which is much the same of what I would say. And the Empress card relates to the mother, and she's pregnant. It's not entirely obvious on the first glance, but if you look a little bit closer, it's quite clear that she has a pregnant belly, and so that would probably be all I could say about that. I wish I knew more.
Yeah, well, I would say it's the Empress card. I'm sure Raquel would confirm that, correct? Raquel?
Yeah. I don't really know about the German pantheon, but I was thinking about other religions and other type of because, for instance, here in Brazil, we do have a few initiatives that correlates tarot cards with the African Brazilian deities, but it's always a stretch because usually the African deities have a few correlations with the major arcanas. They're not only one, like the magician, for instance, has at least 2 African Brazilian deities that can be correlated as. So it's interesting to see as well how the tarot can have correlations in other realities and other types of mythological knowledges.
Yeah, well, it surely does, because it relates to the archetypes in everybody's lives, no matter where they are. And
we're wondering if that Germanic can be correlated to a rune. And then by following a rune, then it's easier to then correlate it to tarot.
Yeah. Or maybe correlates to more than one card.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also caution what I would kind of call something like archetypal reductionism or something like that, where I think that there's, because Jung's idea of archetypes, people have this idea that all of these things are related. And in fact, I think they are. But I also think that it's a bit of a mistake to reduce Egyptian gods and goddesses into Roman gods and goddesses and Norse gods and goddesses and just say they're all the exact same composite being. I mean,
yeah, I concur, because they've all been built out differently. But let's review the bidding here for a moment, if you don't mind. So the early decks were the Marseille deck and the Visconti deck, which came up in the middle of the 15th century, about 1452 or something like that. And so those were identifiable decks at that point. They were already hard and fast. We have copies of them in museums and so on. And since then, there has been essentially no change in the tarot, in all the different versions of the tarot, even when people have changed the names. Sometimes they have, but they can't change. They can't change the archetypal nature of the human being. And so let's say by 1450, the essential nature of the human being and the experiences one has in life to reach wholeness and so on, all those things were pretty well delineated, and the tarot has essentially not changed since then, with the exception of the addition now of this fifth suit, which in the fifth tarot they call the lotus suit. I object to the name, but in any case, but about in the 1870s, let's say the 19th century, there was a young man named Israel Regardie. And Israel Regardie was kind of a brilliant fellow. And based on his work, people created what they called, I think, the Society of the Golden Dawn or something like that. And they started to pull all these ideas of the tarot again together. And they did this largely in Los Angeles. There was a man named Paul Foster Case and another named Aleister Crowley, who had a dispute between them, and very much like the Protestant churches. One guy says, well, I want a church of my own, so I'm going to go out and say it's a little bit different. And so Aleister Crowley created a little bit different looking tarot deck, and the people who followed Paul Foster Case created the Golden Dawn deck, and also the what we now call the Rider-Waite Smith deck.
I just have to jump in here and say Paul Foster Case is the guy who started the Bota deck.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, all right.
Israel Party is the person who did the Golden Dawn deck. So the stuff that I'm talking about is Paul Foster Case's system.
Okay. And so the Bota, Bota stands for, it's an abbreviation that stands for Builders of the Adytum, which adytum is a word for garden, builders of the garden. And so they're talking about the garden of our psyches, basically. That's what they're talking about.
It's actually a Latin word for temple. Inner
oh, okay. All right. So inner shrine too. I heard a more modern version of it, so thank you.
I want to share a particular that I just found out, because we're talking about 21 and Skip, you like the 2 and the 1, and Nick brought that up as well. In the which is one of the oldest, Visconti di Madroni tarot deck from the 1400s, which I have. They are 25 major arcana, and the 3 cards that have been taken out because they were there in the 1400s is charity, hope, and faith. All 3 were females, by the way. You know, the females are represented in the charity, hope, and faith, which then creates a 7 instead of a 3. It becomes 7, and 7R is the path that it takes to get to the crown, and 3 is the activating number. But 7 would then be the completion, a human earthly completion.
Yeah. So that's very interesting factoid. And
yes.
one wonders why
yes.
these feminine characteristics got removed when most of the people that kept the tarot going over the 600 years were probably women. So
charity, hope, and faith don't fit into alchemical work.
Yeah, okay. All right. So this is partially the point that we are making in our program next summer, because it is about experiential things. It's not just a logos-oriented explanation of what things are. I mean, we can sit here and explain what these cards mean till we're blue in the face, but until you have an experience, it will not mean as much to you. But the point about the Bota deck is it's basically, think of it as a kind of coloring book. And if you, in the process, if you take that deck and actually fill in the colors yourself, you will have an experience. It will be a numinous experience. And that's quite a bit different from just having me or anybody or Nick or anybody else tell you what they mean, what those cards mean. You actually physically have an experience. And I don't know, maybe that's one topic we ought to take up next summer.
We're wondering if one is allowed to, because I didn't have the book that told me what yellow meant or blue or green. I don't have that book. And I would have colored it according to my own whim. How would that change things? Because I don't
know how it would change things precisely. You'd have to do it the other way too to find out whether there's a qualitative difference. But anyway, if you buy the deck,
I would
get
speak
an
to
instruction
that.
sheet. Go ahead.
I would speak to that. You know, we messed around with the tarot back in the 60s, and it was mildly interesting, like palm reading and astrology, etc. But when I did the cards and I had the instructions and I did the proper colors and learned what each card meant, and if you're really going along with the program, the Bota program, you really, you go through them fairly quickly, about 3 days for each card. And then eventually you go through them. I can't remember, Nick, but I think it's maybe every 2 weeks you do a card. And you really, really absorb that excellent imagery that's talking to your unconscious the whole 3 days or the whole week. I mean, you know, you work on it every day at some point. And I agree with Nick. It's a really, and I guess it was Skip. It's really the very good tarot experience. I mean, I feel like everything you guys talk about, I understand because of those months that I spent
doing that. Yeah.
Being with my own deck and coloring my own deck.
Right.
I have to confess though, Nick, I never got to the part of coloring the borders. I have to go back.
Yeah.
I guess I'm a bad girl. I have to go back and color the borders. I'm going to start tomorrow morning. I'm going to start.
So the book with instructions on coloring border and image is called The Coloring Book of the Bota.
Well, I actually joined the Bota group for a year.
Yeah, what I wanted to mention here, let me interject for a moment, is although those gentlemen were doing that back in the 1920s, Bota, the builders of the Aditum organization, still exists, and it is in Los Angeles. Yes, you can find it through Google, and I'm pretty sure they have a website. I know you can purchase a lot of items from them directly, and you know, their contributions are very impressive, actually. So,
are they related to the Rosicrucians?
Sure.
So I just want to make sure that everyone has the necessary information to begin this process if they'd like to. So what Skip has said is true. They're an organization in Los Angeles, but it's not a formal organization and that you need to sign up, be initiated, attend in-person events. You can buy the deck online. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can buy it on their site. They'll ship it to you. It comes with instructions to color the cards and information, very basic information, but still pretty deep compared to the basic information that's offered on other decks. But you can also sign up on their website to be a member of their organization, and they will then every 2 weeks send you bits of information, which are essentially meditations and working with the card, staying with that mode of consciousness for 2 weeks or a period of time in which you're coloring the card, you're kind of meditating on the card, you're really attempting to build that into your own consciousness or your own psyche. And that's an invaluable experience. I completely concur with what Rhea has said about that. I mean, that for anybody, I would highly recommend that.
Right.
And it requires
as you correctly say, back in the 1920s, they were like a secret society, and you had to join them and go through levels of training and such, but they really don't do that much anymore, and it's mainly people who are keeping the information available on the website.
They also have several great books that you can buy if you don't want to go through that process. There's Tarot, A Key to the Wisdom of the Ages by Paul Foster Case, The Book of Tokens by Paul Foster Case. He has books on Rosicrucianism, number symbolism, letter symbolism.
Are they related to the Brotherhood of Light?
They're not. I don't think they are.
Okay.
Rhea, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say that, Gilda is so deeply immersed in and educated in the unconscious, the collective unconscious, the Jungian work. I mean, I wasn't when I first started with Bota. And so for me, it was my portal into the idea that I didn't create my own ego, that I didn't create, everything that I think you already know, Gilda. So in a certain way, I would recommend you take Nickolaus's advice and get the book that tells you what colors to use and why, and some meditations associated. They're not really meditations, but it's a good word, Nick. But because you're already like a grad student. I mean,
Oh no, I understand.
Just turning someone on to tarot for the first time, I would suggest the Boda papers, but you're going to get so impatient waiting for them to send you stuff that, you know 90% of it. So if I didn't know, Nick, that there was any other way to go to get that instructions.
No, that would have been great back when this deck is 20 or 30 years old.
I don't think there's any way that you can streamline the process of them sending you the information. But I would say that the majority of the information in those pamphlets is already available online.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
But the thing is, I mean, there are some things that are very specific to those bi-weekly pieces of mail that they send you, which I still would recommend. I do think it can be, I was already pretty versed in tarot by the time that I did that. So I was certainly impatient myself, but there were certain things that I got from that process that I haven't been able to find anywhere else.
Well, that's good. I feel the same way. I still have a couple of binders with that stuff in it. And occasionally I have a card or two that I've just drawn, and I go back and I get a huge beefing up of understanding about what this is for me. So yeah, I don't think it's hackneyed or old style at all. I actually recommend it. Yeah.
And there's something just fun. To say this again, I just found it fun, and there was a certain degree of mystique in being mailed these lessons. I just really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think it puts together the person. It allows them to. It gives them a key to start if they never were moved in that direction to begin with.
Patrick Hollywood asks a question. I'll put it to the panel. I have an opinion. The question is, didn't they have an original 10 cards that were the first set of tarot? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I think I would need more information, but the Mantegna tarot key that we've talked about, which you can find online on the Alchemy website, with a full images for all of the cards. I think they did have like 10 initial cards, and then like some probably 25 or so major arcana cards. And it was very different from the tarot that we know. But that was something that was used by like monks and priests and philosophers of the Renaissance period.
And it's not clear whether tarot or modern playing cards came first. I think tarot came first, and then people developed the modern playing cards, the diamonds, hearts, spades, and clubs. And so it's quite possible to do a tarot reading with just a normal deck of cards, if you know what you're doing.
That's how they did it in my country. They used a regular deck of cards.
Oh, they did? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the only issue about that is the court in a regular deck of cards only has 3 court cards, not 4. But aside from that,
so hence what I was trying to say, that even though they had no knowledge of these underlying structures, because of the numerology and whatever else is inherent and alive in this method, it came alive for them and they were able to read. So that's very interesting. They read the Spanish cards. And to this day, they still do. And they are as accurate as anyone else who is conversant in all and has all these books and things. So how does that work? That's something interesting too. Well,
it's a lifetime study, isn't it, Gilda, to master the tarot, or let's say to 50% master the tarot. With the exception of you and Nick here, and maybe Rhea and Raquel, I think most of us have maybe a 50% understanding of all this stuff right now. And so I'm perfectly happy with that, because I've grokked it, and so I know what it can do for me, and how to use it, and when to use it, and why to use it. And so, you know, the rest, the other 50% for me is gravy. It's like, you know, okay, I'm going to collect decks. I want to see how other people have expressed the same ideas. I mean, I'm a art enthusiast, so I'm interested in the art of the tarot.
I think to that end, in a certain sense, all roads lead to Rome. I mean, you know, I know all these different tarot things, and it's pretty much utterly useless unless I'm in a group of people who have weird interests like you all. So,
well, but it's not useless, Nick, because when we're coming up as children, you know, the world is chaotic, and you know, my little red ball is my favorite symbol of how chaotic the world is. And we have to be able to reflect on what's happening to us in life, whatever it is. And so, you know, I think young women more than young men are able to experience the tarot even when they're just at puberty and grok it immediately what it's about. I think young men, we expect somebody to give us a bunch of stuff to memorize, and then once we memorize it, all will be good. And of course, that's baloney too. But men tend to not be interested in this interactional stuff until much later in life, and but so in that, the reason this series is going on is because in my lifetime, lots of things have happened to me, but I find that the tarot really does express a lot of those things. And geez, I would have loved to have known this when I was 18 or 25 or 43, you know, whatever it was. There were times all along, as Paul Simon had it, all along there were incidents and accidents.
Don't you mean you're still crazy after all these years?
Yeah, I'm still crazy after all these years. So I'm getting even more crazy, but thank God for that, because Jesus, I was
trying to figure out maybe something that I could offer that people could understand about what is it about the tarot that has this amazing connectivity. And coming from film and television also, because that's my major at the university, and coming from photography, that's my artistic medium, wanting to make photographs move, so I become study filmmaking. The space between pictures is a genuine space. And that is a space between our thoughts. And that is where enlightenment occurs. That's where we can connect to the emptiness that may offer us something that we don't know. And the tarot has single cards. And when we lay them down, as a game, we're forced to bring together like a narrative or something that we can make sense out of. So the space in between allows us to do that. And that's why it's so powerful. Whereas, for example, in movies, editing, we go watch a movie and we understand the movie in 2 hours. And the movie might have gone from 100 years to who knows, you know, the time is irrelevant, but we understand it, even though it's completely out of time. And it packs it all in. It does an amazing amount of things. Tarot is the same way. It allows you to transcend time and space and get in touch with subjectivity.
What's your favorite food? Hamburger. What do you eat for breakfast?
Yeah, there's a comment here from Blake that there's a Netflix documentary called Inside the Mind of Bill Gates, and I've not seen that documentary, so just mentioning that. But what I do want to mention is a movie called Being John Malkovich. And in that movie, in Being John Malkovich, there's one occasion when John goes into a building and there's a floor 4.5. There's a fourth floor 4.5, and a fifth floor, and the floor 4.5 is only half height, and so you have to bend over to go into it. And one time I went to one of our production centers in India. I mean, this is gruesome, but it's true. And the entrepreneur that had set up the production center had gone on the cheap. And in India, they sort of don't have plans sometimes when they build buildings. They just sort of build it and hope it holds together, right? So this building had been built with a floor 4.5, literally. And so to walk into the room, it was fine if you were a transcriptionist sitting down at a desk and typing, because you're sitting down. So you just learn that you better bend over as you're walking in and out of the room. But it was quite an odd experience to visit that place. And I really couldn't imagine what it would be like to work there regularly. Visiting it there was a special experience for that reason, but also for one other, and that was that it was directly across the street from the slaughterhouse. And so it was just, that was my Being John Malkovich moment in my business career.
Slaughterhouse, was it in the north of India?
Let's see, where was it? I suspect it was in Mumbai area, yeah. Let's see. I don't know. I had
What happened to the holy cows?
Huh?
What happened to the holy cows?
Oh, there were plenty of holy cows in India. I think this might have been a pork slaughterhouse. No, there are plenty of holy cows in India. So, the owners of the cows just let them out on the street, and everybody considers them divine. So they don't bother them at all. And the cows go out in the street and they forage wherever they can go. And then they do come back to their owner at the end of the day to be milked. And this is one of the things that Hindu priests put on Indians about more than 2,000 years ago, and the reason was that the people were slaughtering all the cows for the meat, and they didn't have milk for children. And so the priests got together and decided, well, if the cows are holy, then people stop slaughtering the cows and we'll have milk for children. And so that's how the cow got holy, became holy in India. And they still are holy. They're walking around the streets all the time. Also lambs. And one time I'm in a Land Rover by one of the people that I was working with, and he hit a goat, or he hit a baby goat, a lamb. Okay, the mother of these two lambs decides to run out across the street in front of them. It's not like we were going fast, it was like 30 miles an hour, but she just ran across right in front of this Land Rover, and she had two little babies trotting along behind her. Boom, ba-bump, ba-bump. We wiped out one of the babies. And he said, oh, well, that means my village will have food today for lunch. Okay. Anyway, we digress. Nick, you have the floor.
Okay.
10 more minutes for tonight.
Yeah, I really want to get in the habit of, over the coming months, just using the last 10 minutes to have some concluding thoughts and remarks and so on. So, you know, I don't have that much to say personally, but if anybody has any final comments, questions, observations, etc., please lodge those now. I'm thumbing back through the YouTube chat here to see if there are any questions that we've missed. Manuela asked, do you think that the changes are for the worse? The magician being a woman is not the same as being a male. Their energies are not the same. Manuela, I'm not sure. I don't know. You may be talking about the talk deck, and I don't know that it is a female magician. But I don't, you know, personally, I'm not very keen on the changes that Crowley made in his deck. So that's probably all I would have to say about that. I mean, to each their own, but I prefer just the old time religion.
Well, I would like to add one thing on that very point then, and that is that the magician represents the eternal moment. And what that, I mean, from a psychological point of view, this is a Jungian psychology channel, so I have to point back to psychology here for a minute. The magician is all of us every day in every single moment, and we are all facing the eternal moment. And before us, as the magician card suggests, the magician is there. He's pointing to heaven. He's pointing to hell, or to the ground, and he has his magic wand. And before him, he has the assets he needs to go forward into life. And he has his choice of what to select and what to do. And we all have that choice in every minute of our lives. That's the point, that this is the eternal moment. You select the assets that from your table that you can work with, and that will change your life. Whatever you do this evening, that, you know, you decide to have something bad for a snack tonight, you know, never know what could happen. But every minute that you do something makes a difference, and we're all magicians in that respect. And so I'll just share my favorite quote from Carl Jung, which is this one, the eternal moment. The great thing is now and here. This is the eternal moment. And if you do not realize it, you have missed the best part of life. You have missed the realization that you were once the carrier of life, contained between the poles of an unimaginable future and an unimaginably remote past. Millions of years and untold millions of ancestors have worked up to this moment, and you are the fulfillment of this eternal moment. One should take each moment as the eternal moment, as if nothing were going to change, not anticipating a faraway future, for the future always grows out of that which is. You must live life in such a spirit that you make in every moment the best of the possibilities. C.G. Jung. And that's what the magician does. And so it doesn't have to do with gender. It has to do with all of us, in my opinion, but from a psychological point of view.
Very well said. And I personally cannot think of a better way to conclude than with that.
Me either. So thank you everybody for being here. And Nick, you're going
Thank
to
you,
carry on
everyone.
again next week, right?
Yes, please check in with us next week, same time, same place. I will give a presentation, and then in the weeks that will follow, Jordan Hoggard, Gilda Cao, and Raquel Fonseca will also be giving presentations. So please stay tuned.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
And good night. We'll see some of you all on Wednesday.